able to chat with different people who are experts in areas of faith here in Canada. And so we are going to revisit our friends at Open Doors Canada. We normally talk to Reverend Gary Stagg, but today we have the wonderful privilege of speaking to the Communications and Relationships Manager, Andrew Croft. Andrew, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me this morning, Holly.
Of course, you had your annual watch list come out in January, and every year there seems to be some subtle changes. And so, for this, if you are unfamiliar with the watch list that Open Doors Canada puts out, it's the 50 countries where faith costs the most. And then in this watch list, there's also ways that we can activate in prayer, which is exciting because sometimes you get the bad news and you're like, oh no, what do we do? We're just kind of stuck here. But I'm curious as to why do you guys do the list every year?
Yeah, the World Watch List is something that Open Doors has been doing for more than 30 years. It was started initially, like our ministry began, working behind the Iron Curtain, but with the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was like, okay, what do we do now? And it was started internally as a list to say, okay, where do we need to be working? Where are things happening? And so that's how it got started. And it still helps us to know where we need to be active, what countries we need to be working in. But then the reason that we do it every year is the information is so valuable to know for us in Canada, how can we be praying for our persecuted family? What needs are out there? What countries need to be in our focus and attention? And so it's that dual focus. Where do we need to be working and strengthening the church through the physical work that we do, but also on a spiritual level, where do we need to be praying? What countries do we need to be lifting up before God each and every day so that we can make sure that our persecuted family is strengthened and encouraged?
Yeah, for sure. We're in a bit of a weird day and age where people are a bit more skeptical about what they hear um, in media, what they see on the news, people wondering what can we trust. I mean, fake news and
Mhm.
misinformation seems to be everywhere. How can we trust this particular list?
Well, the World Watch List is an incredible work of research. It involves both field and desk research. And so we have a team that's overseeing that research, but ultimately more than 4,000 people are involved in compiling all of the data because we go to the grassroots level to get our information, to get our sources, to find out, okay, about incidences of violence or incidences of persecution, and so that we can know what is happening. And so it's a huge effort involving a lot of people. But that, I mean, that is important, but that alone doesn't say, okay, this is trustworthy. We actually have a methodology document that we follow. That is so it's like an 80 plus page methodology document that says, okay, this is how we figure it out. This is how we do our research, how we compile our numbers, and how we create the list. And so that methodology really allows us to say, hey, you can check out how we get our numbers. Follow this methodology. This is what we're doing. We're very open about that so that people can see like, okay, yeah, we're not just like, okay, oh, that country's bad. So okay, let's put that at number one. And oh, you know what? This country could be three. What could we put in between them? No, there's a methodology that is followed. And then
Mhm.
all of the research that is done is then sent to the International Institute for Religious Freedom, who checks it and puts their stamp of approval on it to say, yeah, this research is authentic. It's correct. And so, yeah, you can trust the World Watch List. It's not just used by Open Doors. It is trusted by other ministries who say, "Oh, we know that Open Doors does good research, and so we're going to use their research to let people know what is happening."
So, from last year to this year, what are some of the differences or changes that you've noticed on the list?
Yeah, every year, Open Doors, we do the list. There's always some changes, right? Like there's some new countries that come on, some countries that drop off. And that doesn't mean that, oh, so like this year, last year Indonesia was on the list, this year it's not. That doesn't mean that Indonesia's had this great change in religious freedom. It just means that other countries around them have gotten worse. So two new countries that have joined the list this year are Chad, which is in sub-Saharan Africa, which It's been rising every year for the last 5 years or so, 2 points every year because violence is increasing, and violence is increasing across sub-Saharan Africa. We've been talking about this for a couple of years. I'm sure Gary has mentioned it previously. And so Chad has joined the list as yet another country experiencing extreme violence against Christians. And the other country that joined the list this year is Kyrgyzstan, which is in Central Asia. And Kyrgyzstan was actually the biggest riser. It had the biggest score increase, went up the most places. And it's because both an increase in violence, there's been Kyrgyzstan among the Central Asian countries is normally a country that has kind of been less violent, but there's been an increase in violence this year. And then the government itself, like most Central Asian governments, are authoritarian, and so they're actually clamping down more. It's happening in Kyrgyzstan, and so they saw a sharp increase. Kazakhstan, which is right next door, also same thing, uh, clamping down of an authoritarian government, and so they had a sharp increase as well. And so that's another thing where we saw is that in Central Asia that there's this authoritarianism is on the rise, and so something that we're keeping an eye on, something we're praying about and focusing on. And the other thing that we're talking a lot that showed up a lot in the research this year is that the church in many places is having to go further underground. This as it's not new this year, but it certainly stood out to the researchers this year. If you remember, several years ago, in Afghanistan, the Taliban took over. All of a sudden, Afghanistan became number one on the World Watch list. The next year, it dropped all the way down to number 10. And that was because the church had to go farther underground, making it harder to access and get verified reports, which meant their violence score went down, and which it meant that their drop having. Well, we're seeing this in lots of places.
Hmm.
The church is having to go more underground in China. For a while, China was having a little more freedom, but the government is clamping down on again, and so large churches are having to break back down into house church movements, and we're seeing that in Algeria, essentially all Protestant churches are now closed in Algeria, and so the church can't meet openly and publicly; it has to go underground. And so this is a trend that is troubling in one sense because underground is not what we want the church to be. We want the church to be salt and light. But at the same time, we know that when the church was very underground in China, that's when it exploded, right? And so God is able to work in each and every circumstance, in each and every situation. And so even when the church is going underground, people are still meeting Him, still meeting Jesus. And so we are thankful for that. But one of the things that I just want to note is that the researchers said this year is that they noticed that with the church going underground is that there is an increase in monitoring and whatnot, which is leading the church to be less open in their witness.
Hmm.
And so that's something that we need to be praying about. We understand why they need to be that way. We understand why this is happening. But we want our brothers and sisters to be able to be salt and light. And so praying for them, praying that they would be able to find the opportunities to share, knowing with having God's wisdom to say, yes, this is the person I can talk to. No, this person is not someone I should talk to. And so that's another trend that we're following and talking about and want to make sure that people are aware of.
Hmm. I mean, this is a lot of conversations about international. What about here in our own backyard as the Canadian church? What does this mean for us?
Yeah, so I mean, the church in Canada, we have to remember that we are part of a global church, part of a family, right? And
Hmm.
that is our job and our role to play our part in that family. And right now, our role is to support our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted. Hebrews chapter 10:33 says, at one point, this is what you were experiencing. You were experiencing this hardship and this persecution, but now you stand side by side with those who are so treated. And our job as Open Doors Canada is to remind the church in Canada that we are to stand side by side with our brothers and sisters who are facing very high levels of persecution and discrimination for their faith in Jesus Christ.
I always find it so inspiring when we hear about the church internationally and in these persecuted areas that they still pray for us too, which for me is like mind blowing because they're the ones in these really stressful situations because they've chosen Jesus. Um,
Absolutely.
as the Canadian church, how can we best support them?
Yeah, so we want to make sure, of course, that we're praying for them. The number one thing our persecuted family asks for is prayer. And they are praying for us, like you said, which is because they understand and believe in the power of prayer. And so we need to stand side by side with them by praying for them. And so I would encourage people to download a copy of the World Watch List at worldwatchlist.ca. And in that World Watch List, it's got information about each of the top 50 countries and it's got prayer points so that you can be praying maybe, for the next year, take one a week and say, I'm going to pray for this country this week. Make sure that we're lifting up our brothers and sisters who are living in these places. And so prayer is so important, but also, making sure that we are aware of what is happening, so that we can know that uh, what is happening to our brothers and sisters. Follow us on social media at Open Doors Canada to stay up to date to what's happening, so that your prayers can be directed to where God is working and what God is doing, and so that we know that. So I would encourage. Always, it comes back to prayer. Pray, pray, pray. Make sure that we're praying for our brothers and sisters.
Oh, amazing. Can you repeat your website again for people to go and download the resources so they can feel that it's prayer, but there's also a little action involved there too?
Yeah, if you want to download the World Watch List, the easiest website is go to worldwatchlist.ca. If you want to know more about our organization, you can go to opendoorscanada.org to find out everything you need to know about us and about how we are helping and supporting our persecuted brothers and sisters around the world.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking some time to share about the watch list and what we need to be watching out for.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Holly. Blessings.
All right. Now I'm gonna have you essentially just say, because we're gonna chop this up a little
Yep.
in post, as they say. So for our audio podcast, we'll have the whole thing. But
Yep.
for the radio podcast, we might need to
Yep.
only air the highlights and then direct
Sure.
people to the podcast. So I'm just gonna ask you if you could stick around a bit longer for our podcast and just be like, yeah, for sure.
Sure.
Okay. All right, this is some really important and interesting information. Andrew, do you mind sticking around a little bit longer so we can dive a little bit deeper?
Absolutely. I'd love to do it.
Amazing. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Andrew Croft of Open Doors Canada, he's the communication and relationship manager. He's going to be sticking around for our podcast version. So make sure you download and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on our full conversations with our incredible guests.